The Y Group shareholders meeting opened at exactly 9 in the morning, and my mother walked into that conference room wearing the pearl earrings my father had given her before he died. She did not know yet that by noon she would no longer own the company. She did not know yet that the handsome young man seated to her left, her second husband of 18 months, had already signed papers she had never seen. She only knew that her daughter, the difficult, dramatic, ungrateful daughter, was sitting quietly in the back row in a plain black dress, and she did not understand why I was smiling. The chairman began reading the financial disclosures. My mother sipped her water. Her husband, Jan Moxian, 31 years old and beautiful in the way debt-trapped men learn to be beautiful, reached over and squeezed her hand. And on the third page of the disclosure, the chairman paused. He looked up. He looked at my mother. He said, "Mrs. Y, before we continue, I need to ask you to confirm a transfer of shares dated 14 months ago." My mother's smile did not move, but her eyes did. They slid, just for a second, to her husband. He would not meet them. That was the first crack. My name is Hua Yunshu, and I was my mother's only daughter. I am telling this story in the calmest voice I have because in my first life I never got to tell it at all. In my first life I was buried in a coat she picked out, in a cemetery she paid for, next to a father whose grave she had not visited in 9 years. Before we go back, understand what the room saw that morning. The Huai Group was my father's company. Textiles, then logistics, then luxury real estate. I have 40 years of quiet, stubborn work. When he died, my mother, Shen Rulan, inherited 72% of the shares. She was 53. She was beautiful in the way women become beautiful when they have never been refused. She grieved for 4 months. Then she met Jan Moxian at a charity auction, and within a year, she had married him in a ceremony I refused to attend. The society columns called it a love story. My mother told everyone it was proof that life begins again. Behind her back, my aunts whispered the obvious. He was 22 years younger, broke, and had arrived with a single suitcase and a smile that cost nothing to produce. My mother laughed them off. She said I was jealous. She said my father would have wanted her to be happy. She said, in a tone that still cuts me, that a daughter who couldn't celebrate her mother's second chance was not really a daughter. I tried in that first life to warn her. That is the part I need you to understand before any of the rest makes sense. I tried. I hired a private investigator and brought her a folder of his debts, $6 million in personal loans across 3 provinces, a fiancé he had abandoned in the south, a mother he had not spoken to in 4 years who lived in a 2-room apartment and still worked night shifts. I laid the folder on my mother's breakfast table. She did not open it. She slid it back across the marble and said, "Yunshu, if you keep doing this, you will lose me." I kept doing it. I warned her when he started asking about the company's internal structure. I warned her when he hired a new personal lawyer whose firm had a history of elder fraud cases. I warned her when he began suggesting she was too tired to attend board meetings, when he started traveling with her assistant, when the household accounts began showing withdrawals I could not trace. Every warning made her colder. Every folder I brought her moved me a little further from the center of her life. By the end of the first year, she had changed the locks on the estate without telling me. By the end of the second, she had cut me out of the family trust for emotional instability. By the end of the third, she had signed a revised will that made Jan Moxian her primary heir, with the justification that I had turned my back on the family. Then came the accident. The official story was that I had been drinking. The official story was that I had argued with my mother at the gala, that I had stormed out, that I had driven myself home on a wet road in an emotional state, and lost control on a curve I had driven 100 times before. The official story said my blood alcohol was 3 times the legal limit. The official story did not mention that I had been handed a glass of champagne by Jan Moxian himself in the lobby before I left, that I had taken 1 sip, that I had felt the room tilt before I reached the car. The official story did not mention that the dash cam in my car had been disabled the week before during a routine service booked by my mother's household manager, a woman Jan Moxian had personally hired. I died at 29. On a roadside my mother drove past twice a week without ever slowing down. She did not cry at my funeral. As my aunts told me this later in this second life, without knowing why I was asking. She wore gray, not black, because Jan Moxian had said black aged her. She left the service after 40 minutes. Within 6 weeks, Jan Moxian had been added as co-signatory on her personal accounts. Within 4 months, he had begun the slow, elegant transfer of shares that would, over the next 2 years, strip her of controlling interest in the Hawaii Group. Within 3 years, my mother was sitting in a small suite in a residential care facility, drinking tea bought by a caretaker, while Jan Moxian lived in our estate with a 24-year-old girlfriend and hosted charity galas in the ballroom where my father used to dance with me on his feet. That is the life I lost. Then I opened my eyes and I was 27 again. A goal, and the date on my phone was 2 weeks before my mother's wedding. Most people, when they return, move fast. They run to warn, they run to fight, they run to prove. I sat very still on the edge of my old bed, and I thought about the folder I had pushed across my mother's breakfast table, and the way her eyes had gone flat, and the 3 years she had spent punishing me for being right. And I realized something that the first Yunshu never understood. My mother did not marry Jan Moxian, despite the warnings. She married him because of them. Every time I laid out evidence, she heard an accusation that she was foolish. Every time I tried to protect her, she felt diminished. She was not being conned in the simple sense. She was being flattered, and flattery is a hunger that grows angrier the more it is interrupted. If I stood in her way again, she would choose him again. She had already proven that. She had chosen him over me, over my father's memory, over her own company, over her own dignity. She had chosen him, and she had kept choosing him, all the way into the grave she made for me. So in this life, I would not stand in her way. I would hold the door open. I sat on that bed for an hour. Then I did something the old Yunshu could never have done. I called my mother. I told her I had been thinking about my behavior. I told her I had been unfair. I told her I could see how much Jan Moxian made her happy and that I was ashamed of how I had treated them both. I asked if I could come to the wedding. I asked if I could apologize to him in person. She cried, not much, just enough. She said, Yunshu, I knew you'd come around. That was the beginning of the silence strategy. And from that day forward, I became the daughter she had always wanted. Warm, complimentary, uninterested in the accounts, uninterested in the board meetings. I attended the wedding. I smiled for the photographs. I toasted the groom. I told Jan Moxian privately that I hoped we could start over, that I regretted the investigator, that I wanted to be part of the family. He embraced me like a long-lost sister. He smelled of my father's cologne, which my mother had given him from the closet she had refused to open for me. I said nothing about the cologne. I said nothing about anything. Over the following 18 months, I let him do every single thing he had done the first time. I let him charm my mother's assistant. I let him book the trips. I let him suggest the household manager. I let him sit beside her at board meetings and lean in when numbers were discussed. I let him hire his personal lawyer, the one whose firm specialized in elder fraud. I smiled at every dinner. I asked polite questions about his family. I sent his mother a gift basket at the Lunar New Year with a card signed in his name because I wanted her address confirmed in my records. In the first life, I had fought Thread A, what they did. This time, I let Thread A unfold exactly as it wanted to. And while it unfolded, I ran Thread B in the dark. Thread B began 3 days after the wedding. I hired a lawyer, not my mother's lawyer, not my father's old firm. A woman in a different city, a forensic accountant by training, who had left accounting to practice trust litigation. Her name was Ren Jiai. And she had never lost a contested inheritance case. I paid her a retainer in cash in person, and I told her I wanted 3 things built quietly over the next 2 years. A full documentary record of every share movement in Huai Group. A sealed deposition from my father's original attorney about the true intent of his will, and a dormant petition ready to file on 24 hours notice for the restoration of the company's founding shareholder clause, the one my father had written and my mother had quietly amended out of the bylaws in the months after his death. Renjiai asked me one question. What are we really doing here? I told her the truth. I am waiting for my mother to sign something she should not sign. When she does, I want the floor to open under the person who made her sign it, not under her. She understood. As she began work that afternoon, Thread B grew quietly for 18 months. Ren Jiai's team reconstructed every transaction Yan Moxian touched. They found the shell companies. They found the offshore accounts. They found the pattern of small legal-looking transfers that were quietly bleeding the Huai Group subsidiaries. They found the consulting firm registered in his cousin's name that had invoiced Huai Group for 12 million in services that had never been rendered. They found the forged signature on a real estate transaction in Suzhou, my mother's signature, which my mother had never made because she had been in Paris that week with me, on a trip I had personally organized so that Yan Moxian would have a clean window to operate. He did exactly what I expected him to do in that window. He forged her name. He moved a building. He pocketed 7 million. He told her when she returned that the transaction had been routine and she had signed it before she left. She believed him. She had to. Admitting otherwise would mean admitting I had been right the first time. Thread B also included something I am only now willing to describe out loud. I contacted Yan Moxian's mother, quietly, through a third party. I did not tell her who I was. I told her that her son had married a wealthy woman and was in serious trouble, and that if she would be willing to speak to a lawyer about the version of her son she actually knew, there would be no cost to her and no obligation. She agreed. Renjiai flew to her 2-room apartment in the north and sat at her kitchen table for 4 hours. His mother talked about the debts, the abandoned fiancé, the stolen savings.
At the brother he had beaten when he was 18, the father's funeral he had skipped to attend a nightclub opening. She cried. She said at the end, "If he is hurting another woman, I want to stop it." She signed a sworn statement. Renjiai sealed it in an envelope. I never opened it. I kept it in a drawer. That envelope is Thread C. Thread C is the one the audience is not supposed to fully understand yet. Thread C was a series of small, strange choices I made during those 18 months that did not obviously connect to anything. I refused to ever discuss the building in Suzhou in my mother's presence, even when she brought it up. I allowed my mother's household manager, the one Yan Moxian had hired, to continue managing the estate, even after I had proof she was taking a cut. I let Yan Moxian drive my mother to a specific cardiologist he had recommended, even though I had read the cardiologist's reviews and knew he had been sued twice. I rescheduled my own annual physical 3 times, and each time I moved it to a different clinic, and each time I kept the records on a separate server. I attended a single charity gala where I wore a necklace my father had given my mother on their 10th anniversary, a necklace Yan Moxian had misplaced 6 months earlier, a necklace I had quietly retrieved from the pawn shop where he had placed it under a false name. I wore it for one evening. I let him see me in it. I did not say a word about it. I put it back in the safe the next morning. Each of these choices was a small controlled message, not to him, to my mother's subconscious.
I was planting moments she would replay later in the dark when the truth finally arrived, and I wanted her to understand that I had been telling her the real story in silence for 1.5 years. Around the 15th month, the pressure cooker began. Ren Jiai's team had by then built a case strong enough to file, but filing was not my goal. Filing in court would have embarrassed my mother privately and left Yan Moxian room to negotiate. I wanted something cleaner. I wanted him to humiliate himself in a public business setting because my mother's identity was tied to her public business image, and the only way she would ever truly believe me was if she watched him betray her in front of the people whose respect she valued more than mine. So I waited for the annual shareholders meeting. Before the meeting, I let 3 things happen.
I let Yan Moxian press my mother to sign over an additional block of shares. the block that would tip him past the 30% threshold that activates the founding shareholder clause. I let him book a private celebration dinner for the night after the meeting at the most expensive restaurant in the city, and I let him invite his 24-year-old mistress under the cover of a client. I let my mother's household manager leak the date of the shareholders meeting to Jan Moxian's personal lawyer a week in advance so he would feel prepared. And then, on the night before the meeting, I had dinner alone with my mother. She was tired that night. She had been tired for months, in a way I recognize now as the tiredness of a woman being slowly poisoned by constant emotional management of a man who did not love her. She told me over soup that she was glad Jan Moxian and I had become close. I told her I was glad too. I told her that I wanted her to know whatever happened in the next few weeks, that I loved her. She looked at me strangely. She said, "What do you mean, whatever happens?" I said, "Just that life is unpredictable. I want you to hear me say it now." She reached across the table. She took my hand. She said, "Yunshu, I was hard on you before. I know that." I said, "I know, Mama." That was the closest to a reconciliation we ever had, and I had engineered it to the minute, because I needed her to carry that sentence with her into the room the next day. I needed her to remember that her daughter had told her she loved her the night before everything fell apart. The shareholders meeting opened at 9. You already know how it began. As the chairman asked my mother to confirm a transfer of shares dated 14 months ago, my mother's eyes went to Jan Moxian. He did not meet them. That was the false peak. Because in the next 5 minutes, Jan Moxian recovered. He smiled. He stood up. He said there had been a clerical confusion, and that he personally could clarify the history of the transfer. He spoke for 7 minutes fluently, using terms he had clearly been coached on, and by the end of those 7 minutes, the room was nodding. My mother was relaxing, the chairman was reaching for the next page. Jan Moxian sat down, put his hand back on my mother's, and glanced at me in the back row with a look that said clearly, "You lose again." I did not react, I did not move. I simply raised one hand, and Ren Jiayi, who had been seated near the door as an observer from outside council, stood up. The cascade began. Reveal 1, the small embarrassment. Ren Jiayi asked the chairman if the meeting could pause briefly to address a documentary irregularity. She distributed a single-page summary to every shareholder. It showed 2 versions of my mother's signature, side by side, on the Suzhou real estate transfer. The handwriting expert's certification was stapled to the back. The room went quiet. My mother looked at the page. She looked at her husband. He said quickly that signature verification could be tricky and that the matter should be handled privately. The chairman agreed. Reveal 2, the contradiction. Ren Jiayi then asked if she might also distribute the travel records for the week of the transfer. She did. Yeah, they showed my mother and me in Paris. They showed hotel keycard logs, boarding passes, even a receipt from a cafe where my mother had paid with her personal card at the exact hour her signature had allegedly been made in Suzhou. A murmur moved through the room. Jan Moxian's smile tightened. Reveal 3, the proof. Ren Jiayi distributed the consulting firm invoices, 12 million in services never rendered. The firm registered to Jan Moxian's cousin. The bank records tracing the funds to a personal account in Jan Moxian's name. My mother's face did not change. She simply sat very still, the way a person sits when the ground beneath them has tilted, and they are not yet ready to acknowledge that they are falling. Reveal 4, the witness. At this point, Jan Moxian stood up again, more loudly, and announced that this was a coordinated attack by a disinherited daughter and that none of this evidence would hold up in court. He pointed at me. He said my name 3 times. He said I had fabricated the entire file. Ren Jiayi waited for him to finish. Then she said, "We have a sworn statement from Mrs. Yan Peilun, the defendant's mother." The room went still. She did not open the envelope. She simply placed it on the table in front of my mother. She said,
Mrs. Huai, this statement describes your husband's prior financial history, his abandoned engagement in the South, and his pattern of marrying women for their assets. We have not opened it in this meeting out of respect for the personal nature of the contents. You may open it when you choose. Yan Moxian stared at the envelope like it was a live animal. Yes, my mother did not pick it up. She did not need to. She knew, looking at her husband's face, that everything inside it was true. Reveal 5. The motive. Renjiai closed with the final document, the actuarial analysis. She explained, in a voice so gentle it was almost cruel, that Yan Moxian had taken out 3 life insurance policies on my mother in the past 9 months, totaling just over 42 million, naming himself as sole beneficiary, and that the most recent policy had been signed 3 weeks ago, one day after my mother's cardiologist, a cardiologist Yan Moxian had personally recommended, had written her a prescription for a medication with a known interaction profile that was not in her chart. My mother finally moved. She looked at me. Really looked at me across the length of that conference table. For the first time in 2 lives, I did not move. I did not smile. I only nodded once. Reveal 6, the irreversible collapse. The chairman then read, quite simply, from the original founding shareholder clause of the Huai Group, the clause my father had written, the clause my mother had amended out 14 years ago, but which Renjai had successfully restored, quietly, 6 months earlier, through a technical challenge in trust court. The clause stated that any shareholder proven to have acquired shares through fraud against the founding family was to be stripped of those shares immediately and permanently, with the shares reverting to the next direct Huai bloodline heir. That was me. By noon, my mother was no longer the controlling shareholder of the Huai Group. By 1 o'clock, Yan Moxian was no longer a shareholder at all. By 2, the board had voted unanimously to refer the forgery and insurance matters to the police. And then the second shock arrived, for the audience and for my mother both. Because my mother turned to me in the chaos of that emptying room and said, Yunshu, thank you. Take the shares, take the company, it is yours. Please, just help me survive this. And I said, no, Mama. She stared at me. I said, I'm not taking the company. I signed a trust this morning before the meeting, transferring the reverted shares into a charitable foundation in Papa's name. The foundation board is composed of 3 of Papa's oldest colleagues, none of whom will ever let you be cheated Mian Sen. You will retain your salary and your seat. You will retain your dignity. But the company will never again belong to one person who can be charmed into signing it away. She did not understand at first. She said, but Yunshu, then what was all this for? I said, it was never for the company, Mama. It was for you. I was not fighting him for the shares. I was fighting him for you. That is the sentence I had waited 2 lives to say. The aftermath was quiet, which is how I wanted it. Yan Moxian was arrested 11 days later on charges of forgery, insurance fraud, and embezzlement. His personal lawyer, who had assisted in drafting the policies, surrendered his license within the month. The household manager my mother had trusted for 2 years was fired, prosecuted for wire fraud, and sentenced to 4 years. Yan Moxian's 24-year-old mistress left the country without saying goodbye to him. His cousin, M, who had registered the consulting firm, testified against him in exchange for reduced charges. Yan Moxian received 14 years. His mother visited him once, brought him a book, and did not visit again. My mother changed slowly, not all at once. For the first 3 months, she lived in a kind of stunned quiet, unable to look at her own hands, unable to look at the closet where my father's cologne had been, unable to look at me without her eyes filling. Then one evening she asked if I would stay for dinner, and I did. Then one weekend she asked if I would go with her to the cemetery, and I did. She stood at my father's grave for a long time. She did not speak. When we walked back to the car, she took my hand, the way she used to when I was 7, and she said, Yunshu. I did not know how to be a widow, so I pretended to be a bride. I said, I know, Mama. She said, the daughter I had the first time. Did she forgive me? I stopped walking. I did not ask how she knew. I do not know, to this day, whether she suspected, whether she dreamed, or whether some mothers simply feel the shape of a child who has come back from somewhere cold. I only know that I looked at her in that cemetery, in her gray coat with the pearl earrings my father had given her, and I understood that she had been punished enough by her own mirror. I said, "She forgave you the moment you said you were sorry without being asked." She cried then, really cried, not the 4-month grief of my father's death, not the dry eyes at my own funeral. She cried like a woman who had finally been told the truth and had survived it. We walked it the rest of the way to the car in silence. I live now in a smaller apartment than the estate. I rent it. It has 1 bedroom, a window that faces east, and a kitchen table where my mother comes for dinner on Sundays. The estate itself was sold at my mother's own insistence 6 months after the trial. She said she did not want to wake up in a house where she had been lied to for 2 years. She lives in a quiet building near the river now. With a caretaker she interviewed herself and a pair of my father's reading glasses on the bedside table. The Hawaii Foundation, in my father's name, funds scholarships for girls from the northern provinces whose mothers work night shifts. Jan Moxian's mother, Jan Pelan, sits on the board. We sent her a letter offering the seat 9 months after the trial. She accepted. She has never asked me a single question about what happened, and I have never offered her a single answer. We understand each other. I have not remarried. I have not dated. I do not know if I will. I do know that I no longer wake up at 3 in the morning with the taste of champagne in my mouth. I do know that when I drive past the curve in the road where I died the first time, I no longer have to look away. I think about her sometimes, the first Yunshu, the one who kept bringing folders to her mother's breakfast table, the one who kept loving harder and harder in the hope that love would finally be enough. I think about how tired she must have been. I think about how alone she must have felt in the last seconds of her life, with the champagne on her tongue and the dash cam dead, and the road wet, and her mother's voice still ringing in her ears, telling her she was jealous, she was difficult.
She was not really a daughter. I owe that Yunshu everything. She is the reason I am still here. I do not visit her grave because she does not have one. I visit my father's and I tell him, quietly, what his daughters did while he was gone. Both of them. The one who warned and the one who waited. They all thought I came back for revenge, but I came back for my mother, and the difference between those two things is exactly why none of them saw me coming.